Good morning. Namaskar. Delighted to be here on this beautiful Saturday morning in London. It's always so special to have the sun out. We are here to begin the day with morning music. I start with a verse dedicated to the Guru. The idea of the song celebrates that very special knowledge that the Guru transfers to a disciple, where he says, where do you think you can find the truth about life, the truth about the mortality of our existence? Only within yourself. It's a poem that is attributed to a Nirgun poet. We'll hear more about Nirgun and Sagun in a bit. By the name Shiv Guru. So as we say, Ijazat, we begin this morning with Shiv Guru. तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः। हाँ ज्ञान की जड़ियाँ दही, हाँ ज्ञान की जड़ियाँ दही, बुरा तो जीने
Good morning and welcome to this session. I'm Arundhathi Subramaniam and my co-conspirator here is Vidya Shah. And what we are going to be doing is just to offer you a glimpse through poetry and through music of an extraordinary heritage of sacred poetry in the Indian subcontinent. An extraordinary heritage that regarded devotion or bhakti as the supreme path to the divine, or the supreme path to self-understanding. Why are we spending this morning? Why have we decided to devote an entire session to bhakti poetry? Why did I put together an entire anthology of bhakti poetry? And why does Vidya spend so much of her time singing these beautiful verses? The answer is really what I'd like to share with you today. I'd like to share some poems with you, but I'd also like to give you a sense of what this heritage of poetry is about. I'm drawn to bhakti poems for various reasons, many of which I actually discuss in the book. Eating God is the title of the book, and as the very title suggests, this is a very unconventional relationship with the divine that we are talking about here. I'm drawn to these for multiple reasons, but before that, I just want to say that when we speak of bhakti poetry, we are talking about an unparalleled upsurge of sacred poems that began in the southern part of India. This was in fervent Tamil hymns to Shiva and to Vishnu, authored by saint poets called the Nayanmar and the Alvar. And this tidal wave of impassioned, wild, unappeasable lust for God, which is what bhakti was, couldn't be contained. It couldn't be contained within gated communities of language, of region, of caste or class or gender. And so it spread from south to west, from north to east. And by the 17th century, it began around the 8th century, by the 17th, there wasn't a crevice of the Indian subcontinent that was untouched by the spirit of bhakti. I'm drawn to these poems for three major reasons, which I'd like to share with you before I read a poem to you and invite Vidya to sing some more. You'll hear these poems shortly. These are startlingly contemporary poems. They sound startlingly contemporary, and that's the reason why so many poets, modern poets, have felt inclined to work on these poems and translate them. The most important thing to remember, really, is that there is nothing monochromatic about bhakti. This is not passive surrender we're talking about here. These are not poets who are God-fearing. They are God-possessed. They're God-mad. So there is a quality of delirium about these poems. They don't require us to be believers in any narrow sense of the term, even if we are allergic to the notion of God. The poems can work. They work for me because they seem to be a direct address to us. And in fact, when you read them or hear them, you realize that they're not in fact an address to you at all. You're incidental. They are a direct address to God. So it feels like these are poets who are having a savagely personal, one-on-one conversation, and you are actually eavesdropping on a very intimate dialogue that's being conducted somewhere in the innermost chamber of the human heart, and you're being allowed access to that. These are not poets who are content with second-hand wisdom, so they're not impressed by scholarship. They're not impressed by scripture. They're not impressed by pandits or priests. These are poets who are not looking for second-hand wisdom because they want a first-hand experience of God, and they want it now. And that gives these poems an urgency that makes them speak to us across the centuries. The second aspect of these poems that's quite extraordinary is the fact of the bhakta. The bhakta or the devotee is this new figure on the Indian spiritual landscape. And this is a person who could be from any background, because the Bhakti movement converged with the need of lower castes to give voice to their own aspirations. So the bhakta could be a poet from the upper echelons of society, but the bhakta could also be a cobbler, a potter, a weaver, a hangman, a tax collector, a burglar. You'll find all of them among the Bhakti poets. But it's not just the devotee who's liberated. As you hear these poems, you realize that God seems to be liberated too. It's a new God we find in these poems. In the song that you just heard Vidya sing, the divine that was evoked is a divine without name and form. This is the nirgun notion of the divine. There are also poems that invoke the divine with name and form, and not just name and form, with an address, with a consort, with a family tree, with a vehicle, with a constitution. You know everything about this particular God. The interesting thing about Bhakti is that however God is invoked, it's a new God. It's a God you can have a relationship of backslapping familiarity with. This is a God who's no longer swathed in doctrine. This is a God who's no longer imprisoned in a sanctum. This is a God who's free to walk in and out of your life. You don't have to understand his language. He already understands yours. You don't have to speak to him in Sanskrit. He knows the language of your heart, and he's just waiting for an invitation. It's a new, very endearing God who's most definitely not a snob. And the final aspect of these poems is the quality of intimacy. This is a God who is sublime and exalted, but this is a God whom you can also treat as a chronically disobedient member of your family. That's how intimate the relationship can be. You can personalize this God if you choose. You needn't, but you can. You can personalize this God. You can infantilize this God. You can cannibalize this God. That's why they talk of eating God. You can make love to this God. You can hurl cuss words at this God and call it a prayer. Anything is possible. Nothing is sacrilegious. Nothing is taboo. Because the underlying premise is that the human and the divine, bhakta and God, cannot be kept apart for very long, however hard they try. The union is just a matter of time. On that note, I'd like to read a poem by a 9th and 10th century Tamil poet, Nammalvar. Nammalvar considered his personal God to be Vishnu, very much a God with name and form. And this is a praise poem to Vishnu. But I choose to read it here because as you read this poem, you realize that it is one of the most inclusive praise poems that can possibly exist, really. Nothing, no one is left out. We here, and that man, this man, and that other in between, and that woman, this woman, and that other, whoever, those people, and these, and that other in between, this thing, that thing, and this other in between, whichever, all things dying, all things living, these things, those others in between, good things, bad things, things that were, things that will be, being all of them. He stands there. Thank you.
since we are talking about a kind of a celebration, a kind of a special bonding, if I can call it that, I'm going to sing actually an unconventional Meera. Meera, to me, was, I think, one of the most, she was a feminist poet actually. To have done what she did way back in the 15th century must have been a bit of a challenge. In this song, she describes her connection. You know, typically in the Mirabai songs, you get to listen to Eri Main To Prem Divani or Mere To Giridhar Gopal, her absolute unconditional love for Krishna. But in this one, she moves into another realm of abstraction where she says, I want to be one with the sky and the earth. And in that path, I find my spiritual journey. So, Hasole dharana shringar Raj Hasole dharana shringar Dharan sarikha peru Dhagara ambar sari odhu Dharan sarikha peru Dhagara ambar sari odhu Nau lakh tara mhare ang lagaye do Nau lakh tara mhare ang lagaye do Pachi dharan par thehru Dharan sarikha peru Dhagara ambar sari odhu Sole dharana shringar Sole dharana shringar Bhaya main bheli ramu main saath bheli ramu Bhaya main bheli ramu main saath bheli ramu Dharan sarikha peru Dhagara ambar sari odhu Dharan sarikha peru Chand suraj mare ang सूरज मारे अंग लगाए दो बासठ मुफड़ा गोटो चांद सूरज मारे अंग लगाए दो बासठ मुफड़ा गोटो ओ हनुमान का काकड़ बांधो ओ हनुमान का काकड़ बांधो पछी धरण पर ठहरू Dharan sarikha peru Dhagara ambar sari odhu Pavan sarikha pankha Chadai do parvat Dandi bandho Pavan sarikha pankha Chadai do parvat डांडी बांधो शेष नाग की आटी चढ़ाए दो शेष नाग की आटी चढ़ाए दो पची धारण पर ठहरू भाया मैं भेली रमू मैं साथ भेली रमू भाया मैं भेली रमू मैं साथ भेली रमू सोले धरण
because Vidya invoked Meera, who's one of the most well-known Indian mystics, actually internationally known at this point in time, I want to talk about some other Indian women mystics who are perhaps less known. I'm not sure there'll be time for many, but I would like to at least mention one of them. This is Janabai. Janabai was a 13th century woman mystic. She was a domestic servant in the home of another major mystic of the times, Namdev. And Janabai's relationship with her personal God is just heartwarming, because this is a woman who, when she's exhausted, calls on her personal God, Vithala. She calls him and says, "Do the dishes for me, I'm exhausted today." And when she's even more tired, she says, "Come and do my hair, come and wash my hair, it's itchy." And she says, "My boyfriend actually gives me a shower." That's the kind of God she has. So this relationship with a God who is infinite and intimate at the same time, who is divine and domestic, without any contradiction between these two roles. This is the kind of God we find in Bhakti poetry. Here's a poem by Janabai translated by Arun Kolatkar. And the earlier poem by Nammalvar, I should just say here, was translated by A.K. Ramanujan. This is Janabai translated by Kolatkar. I eat God. I drink God. I sleep on God. I buy God. I count God. I deal with God. God is here. God is there. Void is not devoid of God. Jenny says, God is within. God is without. And moreover, there's God to spare. This idea of the surplus God is one that's typical of Bhakti poets of a particular kind. The most ecstatic Bhakti poets have this quality. And that brings me to two poems by a poet whom I've grown to love in recent times. This is a poet, Annamacharya, a 15th century Telugu mystic poet from the southern part of the country. He wrote a poem a day. He sang a poem a day in praise of his personal God, who was Lord Venkatesha of Tirupati, whom he calls the God on the hill. We have just an incredible number of padams or poems authored by Annamacharya, and I'd like to read two of them today. The first is to give you a sense of this irreverent relationship with God that we find again and again in Bhakti poetry. This is Annamacharya talking to his God. Imagine that I wasn't here. What would you do with your kindness? You get a good name because of me. I'm number one among idiots, a huge mountain of ego, rich in weakness, in giving in to my senses. You're lucky you found me, God. Try not to lose me. Imagine that I wasn't here. I'm the emperor of confusion, of life and death, listed in the book of bad karma. I wallow in births, in womb after womb. Even if you try, could you find another like me? Imagine that I wasn't here. Think it over. By saving someone so low, you win praise from all over the world. You get merit out of me, and I get life out of you. We are right for each other, God on the hill. Imagine, just imagine, that I wasn't here. This quality, this ability to talk to God the way you choose, is so typical of Annamacharya that he adopts two tones when he speaks to God. There are times when he speaks as a male seeker, so the poems are tormented, yearning, conflicted. And there are times he speaks as a woman seeker. When he speaks as a woman seeker, he speaks as the goddess. This is the goddess Alamelumanga, who is a particularly feisty, vain, conceited, provocative, sensual, playful goddess. So when she talks about her lover, who is the god Venkatesha, she's devoted to him, so she's a devotee, but she's not your average devotee. She's not a typical devotee. She's the kind who can speak to him in any way she chooses. And so the poem I'm going to read to you is one where you're never quite sure who the boss is. Is it the god, Venkatesha, or is it the devotee, Alamelumanga? Who's the boss? Is it the divine, or is it the human? This is a trope that we find again and again. You find it in Kabir, in innumerable Nirgun bhajans. You also find it in highly sophisticated Sagun poems, and Annamacharya's is an example. This is Alamelumanga talking about Venkatesha. He's the master. What can I say when he says I'm better than the others? I don't even have to ask. He takes whatever I say as a command. Why should I brag? My husband is under my thumb. He's the master. Who am I to serve him when he takes joy in serving me? How can I tell you the 1,000 ways he's with me? He knows everything, just like God. And he praises me. He's the master. I'm always in his arms. He's always laughing with me. He's the god on the hill. And I'm Alamelumanga. Do I have to make a statement? He's my slave. He's the master.
Gosh, I'm feeling so greedy right now. So many possibilities. Speaking of this interesting relationship that can be defined in so many ways, I choose to sing a relatively lesser known Nirgun poet who fashioned himself after the very, very well-known Kabir. His name is Paltu Das, also wrote around the same time. And here he describes his relation with his spiritual mentor as sheer love. And he says that this fellow who I'm running after is actually a jogi. And this jogi, this damn jogi, is such a flirt that he steals my heart and won't return it to me. And then he goes on to describe this jogi, his beautiful eyes, his beautiful smile, and how they actually celebrate this love on the banks of the Ganga and the Jamuna. And how the jogi at one point reminds him with the Sheshnag of Shiva. Such is his power. So Paltu Das. Jogi marad ho, haan jogi marad ho, haan prem baan jogi marad ho, jogi marad ho, prem baan jogi marad ho, prem baan jogi marad ho, kas ke मोर कस के हिया मोर कहरवा प्रेम बाण जोगी मारल हो प्रेम बाण जोगी मारल हो कस के हिया मोर प्रेम बाण जोगी मारल हो कस के हिया मोर जोगिया की लाली लाली अखियां हो जोगिया की लाली लाली अखियां हो जैसे कमल के फूल जैसे कमल के फूल चितवन में मन हरा लियो चितवन में मन हरा लियो जोगिया बड़ा चोर जोगिया बड़ा चोर प्रेम बाण जोगी मारल हो कस के हिया मोर हाँ प्रेम बाण गंगा जमुना के बिचवा हो गंगा जमुना के बिचवा हो जहाँ बहे नीर चितवन में मन हरा लियो ताकिन मोरियोर ताकिन मोरियोर प्रेम बाण जोगी मारल हो चितवन में मन हर लियो जोगिया अमर मरे नहीं हो जोगिया अमर मरे नहीं हो उज्ज्वल मोरी आस जोगिया अमर मरे नहीं हो उज्ज्वल मोरी आस करम लिखा पर पावन हो गावे पलटू दास गावे पलटू दास हाँ जिया जोगी मारल हो कस के हिया मोर प्रेम बाण प्रेम बाण प्रेम बाण थैंक यू
Vidya's song just makes me, it reminds me of one very important quality of Bhakti poetry. In the finest poems, you realize that the body is not in any way seen as antithetical to the spirit. There is no war going on in the finest Bhakti poems. They see the body as an instrument of knowing, the body as a zone of wisdom. And so time and again, Bhakti poets invoke the body as the temple. Basavarna, the major Kannada mystic, speaks of the moving temples. He says the moving temples are the ones that last, not the ones of brick and mortar and stone. And Devara Dasamaya, the 10th century Kannada mystic, has a conversation with his god, Ramanatha, where he says, you give me a body, and then you ask me to transcend it. Is that fair? Who set up these rules? These are unfair. He says, you take on a body for a change, my God. You take it on, and then tell me whether it's possible to transcend it. And there's the 14th century woman mystic Soirabai, who is a Dalit woman mystic, one of the lowest in the caste hierarchy. And she speaks to her God, where she says, if menstrual blood makes me impure, show me who was not born of that blood. Give me a God who speaks to us all, pure, impure. This trope, again, is a recurrent one in these poems, this attitude to the body. And that brings me, to the last poem, which is by Tukaram, the 17th century mystic, which is a reminder of the fact that there's nothing unintelligent about bhakti, that these are poets who consciously take on bhakti. Disruptive science of the heart. This is an emotion that is capable not just of annihilating the bhakta, it's capable of annihilating God as well. For me, God is dead. Let him be for those who need him. I shall speak of him no more. We have slain each other. In his praise, I cursed him. God, what an endless affair. Says Tuka, I have squandered my whole life after him. Now, I would like to sit still.
Clearly, it's very hard to sort of pull together what happened over some 5-6 centuries into 45 minutes. But this is always this is a repertoire very close to my heart, so I'm delighted to be doing this this morning. And I think a very, very integral aspect, an important aspect of bhakti is Nama Sankirtanam, that is repeating, taking the name again and again of the Lord. This last piece is not really a Nama Sankirtanam kind of a piece, but it would be lovely if some of you who know the song join in whenever you wish to, really. Clearly, technology can't match up to the bhakti feeling in the morning. I'm struggling with this thing. So wherever you feel like, please join me in saying Patita Pavan Sitaram. Total freedom. Raghupati Raghav Raja Ram Patita Pavan Sitaram. Raghupati Raghav Raja Ram Patita Pavan Sitaram. Jai Jai Raghupati Raghav Raja Ram Patita Pavan Sitaram. Sitaram, Sitaram, bhaj pyare tu Sitaram. Sitaram, Sitaram, bhaj pyare tu Sitaram. Jai Jai Raghupati Raghav Raja Ram Patita Pavan Sitaram. Ishwar Allah tero naam. Ishwar Allah tero naam. Sabko sanmati de Bhagwan. Ishwar Allah tero naam. Sabko sanmati de Bhagwan. Please, Raghupati Raghav Raja Ram Patita Pavan Sitaram. Jai Jai Raghupati Raghav Raja Ram Patita Pavan Sitaram. Jai Jai Raghupati Raghav Raja Ram Patita Pavan
Thank you.
ZTV.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's have a round of applause for Raj on the harmonium, Pratap on the tabla. Ladies and gentlemen, Vidya Shah and Arundhathi Subramaniam. Thank you.